Do you like Huey Lewis in the news? Do you like Huey Lewis in the news? Excuse me, let me do that again.
Oh my God, this is just so rich.
Do you like Huey Lewis in the news? Their early work was a little too new wave for my tastes, but when Sports came out in '83, what the fuck is this?
Oh my God. Drew, this is unbelievable.
Hey everybody, welcome to Will and Drew's Gaming Retrospective. You are listening to episode 19 for the week of March 24th, 2019. I am your host, Drew, and I am joined by the rocket jump specialist, Will.
What's going on, man?
Not much. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing well. You?
I'm good. I'm really excited. We have a great guest today for an interview for the show. My longtime friend Dave is going to be joining us in just a moment, and man, I can't wait to bring him on and talk with him about video games and all these memories. I'm sure we're going to jostle some memories that I've even forgotten along the way, too.
Jocelyn,
yeah. It's a good word, right?
It is. Love it. I'm excited, man.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm really glad that you're here to be a part of this, too, because Dave's a pretty cool dude, and I know you guys have met a couple times, but I think you're going to get the chance to see just how fucking cool he is.
For sure.
Well, let me get some business out of the way first because Dave's listened to me talk about him this entire time. Thanks, everybody, for downloading the show. Be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn. We're on Google Play. You can find us on your favorite podcast app as well. Just go ahead and hit that download button, hit that subscribe button, and you'll get an alert. It'll download straight to your phone whenever our shows are available. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram using at WDGRPodcast. It's at WDGRPodcast. And Will, if somebody would like to follow you on social media, how can they find you?
Will_Gear.
And if you'd like to follow me, hit me up at ScionStorm. And at this point, I would like to welcome in my very longtime friend, Dave. Dave, welcome to the show.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you, man. It's been a long time coming. We've been looking forward to having you on the show basically since we started, and I'm glad we were finally able to get our schedules to sync up and everything and get you on board here.
Yeah, me too.
So if somebody is interested in following you on social media, do you have like a Twitter or anything like that you post on? Or
yeah, you could find me at epic_outro.
Epic_outro?
Indeed.
Very cool. So how'd you come up with that name?
I remember many years ago I was trying to sign up for a discussion forum for one of the bands that I'm in love with, Dream Theater, and I was trying to come up with a username, and it just dawned on me that all their songs have these epic outros, and I was like, that actually sounds kind of cool. Yeah, and also the song by Faith No More, Epic, also has an epic outro.
That is one of my favorite song outros, I think, of all time.
I love it.
The guitar solo and that whole just ending with the piano fading out, man, that is just a killer song. Will, tell me you're familiar with this song.
I'm not, man. I'm kind of like lost right now.
Oh man, you've never heard Faith No More?
Well, I mean, I've heard of them as a group.
All right. When we do our music powwow day, I'm going to give you an education because that
fair
is
enough.
A fucking awesome. I guarantee you've heard the song. It was huge in the 90s.
What's it called again?
Epic.
I probably have, but I can't put a finger on it.
It's all right. We'll take care of that later. So Dave, let's dive into some game chatter, man. What have you been playing these days?
Right now, I'm still kind of wrapping up the remake of Resident Evil 2, which has been awesome. But aside from that, I've been playing a bunch of Fortnite with my fiance and some of her family and friends. As always, I'm playing Friday the 13th, the game, and recently I went back in to try and finish Final Fantasy 13, which I never finished way back when.
Nice.
Oh, yeah. 13 is a fun one. I think is a interesting entry in the Final Fantasy series, but it's one that I enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, it's so far I'm getting a very linear vibe from it, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
I think in a sea of open world games, it's kind of nice to have something that's still an RPG and a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah, and I think given how many open world games there are these days, going back to something that was a little bit more linear is kind of refreshing in a way.
Absolutely. So let's touch on that Resident Evil 2 remake a little bit too, man. Like, what is your take on that so far? How you been enjoying that?
That is almost certainly going to be my game of the year. It is awesome. They
Wow.
did a fantastic job with it. And that's if you played the original version of RE2, you'll love it. And if you've never played it before, you will also love it. It's awesome.
So, what makes it your game of the year?
Now again, it could be dethroned. It's very early in the year, but I think it's a mix of how much I was anticipating it and the nostalgia that I have tied up with that game. I was just very excited to get to dig into it in a new way, and I haven't actually gotten that excited about a game in quite a while.
So I mean, I've always struggled with the Resident Evil games. You know, it's just something that hasn't grabbed me. Like, what is it about that game specifically that is sucking you in so much? Like, is it just the memories of playing the original so many years ago, or is it like this atmosphere of essentially a brand new version of the game that just feels fresh? Or
I think ideally, I mean, it's just the fact that it's a lot of fun. You know, it's very atmospheric. It looks incredible. I've been playing through it with headphones. It's actually the first game I've ever gone through start to finish with headphones, and the sound design is awesome. Which is interesting with the sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the sound design is interesting because in the original version of Resident Evil 2, the soundtrack was incredibly iconic, and it's actually one of my favorite video game soundtracks. And when they did the remake, they approached the sound design totally differently, where the music isn't quite as prevalent as it was in the original, and they went with much more focus on ambient sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's different. It's equally good and effective, but in a different way.
Mm-hmm. What would you say? I'm trying to kind of I'm trying to think of the way to kind of describe it, because like with Doom, right? You had this iconic music in Doom, and then on the PlayStation version of Doom, you know, you kind of went with more atmospheric sounds and tones and things like that. You think it's kind of more akin to that sort of thing?
Not. I mean, in a way, just because of how different it is to what you experienced the first time through, but really, even with the PlayStation and the N64 versions of Doom, where they went with that more creepy atmospheric music, there was still a lot of music. With Resident Evil 2 remake, they went with a lot of like background sound and footsteps and creaking floorboards. It's very cool sound design, but very different from the original.
The headphone set that you're using, is it a surround sound headset?
No, I actually bought it years ago for some Skype session I had to use, so it's pretty much the only thing I had lying around. It's definitely not meant for gaming, but it got the job done well enough.
It's like an office headset.
Kind of, yeah.
You got the little microphone coming down in front of your face and all that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
So Dave, let's go backwards a little bit, man. We've known each other a very long time.
Hell yeah, I think probably going all the way back to kindergarten.
Yeah.
Jesus.
It sounds about right, man. I've known you since I was like 5 years old, and it's kind of crazy because the way our school was, you know, you might have somebody in a class and then you might not see them again for a couple years until you kind of end up back in their class again. So we were in kindergarten, and then I don't think we were in the same classroom again until like, I don't know, third grade or so, fourth grade.
And shockingly, somehow, we've managed to succeed in this relationship.
There's no fighting over, you know, who's got the like 64 box of Crayola crayons and who doesn't.
No, not at all.
No, we were able to avoid those pitfalls.
Yeah, I don't know how, but man, like, you used to fight me over the glue though.
Well, yes, the glue is territorial.
Elmer's.
So let's dive into some talk about like your first foray into video games, because as long as I've known you, or as long as I've been aware of it, you've always been an avid gamer. I don't remember talking about video games with you in kindergarten, but I don't remember anything about kindergarten. But I remember talking about video games with you once we linked up again in like fourth grade. And that's when I think our friendship really took off, and we started bonding over gaming.
The earliest real memories I have of gaming were that my parents had some form of an Atari system when I was really little. And what I remember about it was that it was always broken. And so I never actually got to use it. I got to see my dad use it occasionally, but I don't remember what he played on it. I just remember it was broken, and then it sat in our basement for a long time.
He was too busy breaking it.
Yeah. It seems to me like it was broken unless he wanted to play it. But as long as you wanted to play with it, it was broken.
Ooh, conspiracy theory. I like
quote unquote broken.
We're going to have words with your father about that.
You know, just
it's
like
funny.
Unplugged it slightly.
Yeah, just unscrew the coax.
Yeah.
I know there's different versions of that early Atari, like the Atari 2600, and I know there was at least another one. But I always wondered what version of it was that my parents had.
Yeah.
And then a couple years ago, my dad was cleaning out our attic, and my mom's like, "Hey, we found the box to the old Atari. If you want to like come and take a look." Yeah. So I was like, "Oh man, I'm finally going to solve this mystery." So I like went. And I looked at this dusty old box that he found in the attic. And dude, it wasn't even an official Atari. It was like a Sears brand knockoff of the Atari.
Oh, the old Atari games, like there were like, I don't even want to know if I don't know if it's like counterfeiting or what, but like all these different companies had knockoffs of the system, and like there were no laws in place to prevent like other systems from playing those games. So like I have a ColecoVision that has an attachment that will play Atari games, 2600 games.
Wow.
And Sears had their own games. I think it was like the Sears Telesystem, if I'm not mistaken.
It might be.
I gotta look this up. Cause I had some games that I could swear Sears like published.
I had no idea that Sears was making like knockoff consoles and games and whatnot.
Yeah. Oh, Sears Telegames. I was so close. It's so crazy.
Well,
like the history of the Atari is just bonkers. Because there's just so many ins and outs, and it's kind of like how Vic was talking about like the Nintendo clones in India. It's kind of the same thing, but it was all done here in America. I just threw a link into our Discord chat. If you're curious, but yeah, it looks identical to the 2600. It's just got different branding. That's crazy, man.
I wonder if it's worth anything.
Well,
possibly.
Though I guarantee you, the box is worth something. I don't know how much, but you know those types of things.
How do you ship a box?
Carefully.
Well, I assume you put it in a less valuable box.
Yeah, maybe you stuff it with bubble wrap and bagged air.
Yeah, or you could just break if it's not like glued together, just break it down and ship it flat in another box.
Well, I hate to say it, but that box got tossed.
Oh,
So.
You're breaking my heart, Dave.
$1 million gone, just like that.
Yeah, seriously. $1 million Atari clone box. So do you remember any of the games from that?
I remember that most of the graphics were like very dark. I remember the screen being like largely black with like white, really crude graphics, but I don't remember anything specific, unfortunately.
It's interesting.
It sounds like most Atari games, to be fair.
Yeah, my first real system though is my parents one Christmas got me and my sister a Nintendo Entertainment system. So that was the real first video game system we had.
Core classic.
Yes, and it's funny because It literally took me years to realize that the Nintendo Entertainment System and the NES were the same thing. Like, I didn't realize that that's what NES stood for.
Did you have like any idea like what it might have stood for?
No, I never really gave it too much consideration. It was just kind of a weird thing that I never really thought about until the day I realized they were one and the same.
You weren't one of those kids that called it the NES all the time, were you?
No, absolutely not.
So what were some of the games that you first had?
Well, like everyone, I had the Super Mario Brothers Duck Hunt cartridge.
Oh, yeah.
We also had this game called Marble Madness, which was it was basically you were rolling these marbles down these weird like maps that were kind of like a pseudo 3D, and you would try to get them to like a destination without them like rolling off into oblivion, and that was a lot of fun.
That game is infuriating.
Yes.
It's really hard, and I don't know how large the community is, but there is an avid speedrunner community for that game.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Yeah.
I might have to check that out.
There's some crazy videos on YouTube of people just speedrunning Marble Madness, and I can't even find the fucking exit.
Yeah, I feel your pain, man.
Ugh.
I haven't touched that cartridge probably in a good 25 years, though.
Yeah.
So if you can remember, did you guys play more of the Mario or the Duck Hunt?
We definitely played more of the Mario.
Okay.
Oh, and actually, I have another note that kind of harkens back to me not realizing that NES and Nintendo Entertainment System were the same thing. So there was this one jump in the first Mario Brothers game that I could never make. Like, I tried it over and over and over again, and I just couldn't figure it out. I could not jump over this gap. And it wasn't till like the game came out again on the Wii for the Virtual Console years later that I realized Mario 1 had a run button and that you had to like run to make that jump.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So that was an oversight.
My goodness, Dave.
It's like, how could you not know?
I just didn't know.
Did you guys ever beat Mario back on the day without the run button, or?
I did not beat it, no.
No. Did your sister?
I do not know. I'll have to ask her.
Yeah. I would love to find out. Please ask her when you have an opportunity.
I definitely will.
I shouldn't be teasing. I can't even beat a 6-hour game, for Christ's sake.
Well, we're losing subscribers left and right, so thanks.
Yeah. Just bleeding, hemorrhaging.
Oh, man.
Sorry, folks.
So outside of that, like, what was the next step for you? Like, were there any other Nintendo games that stood out, or did you jump onto the next big thing after this?
I actually fell down the rabbit hole of terrible movie adaptation games.
Oh, no.
Such as the old school Friday the 13th, the game, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, the game, and Jaws, the game.
Ooh.
Yeah, though I did not in my youth realize that those were objectively terrible games.
Yeah.
But apparently they were. I don't even think you can beat A Nightmare on Elm Street, the game, without like using a Game Genie. I could be wrong on that. I know I never beat it.
It's so bad you just have to cheat.
Just to kind of provide a little bit of background to the listeners too, Dave has he's a very large horror fan for like movies. You're a big sci-fi fan, and what else? Like those are kind of the main ones, like sci-fi horror, right?
Yeah, I definitely love my my horror movies, my sci-fi. Every now and then I'll dabble into like fantasy films too, like Lord of the Rings and that kind of thing. But I always come back to horror and sci-fi. And right. Especially the occasions where they come together in a movie like the first Alien, for example.
Oh yeah. So as we're discussing this, keep that in mind, because I think that kind of paints a picture of where your video game preferences kind of lean too over the years.
This is how we're justifying the crappy games I grew up with.
I'm doing.
Dave
I'm doing
loves
my best.
films.
Hey man, I grew up with games out of the bargain bin, so I I know what you're talking about.
There were good things to be found in those bargain bins occasionally.
There were. I mean, but sometimes there weren't too. And
Tomcat Alley.
Yeah. So out of all those movie adaptations, which one like is your favorite?
Not because it's good, but just because I have the fondest memories of it, would probably be the first Friday the 13th game.
Mm.
But again, not because it's good.
Yeah.
Another game that was significant to me in the Nintendo era is actually the first video game I ever purchased with my own money. Was Damien sold me a copy of Contra.
That's so Damien.
Oh man,
Yeah.
so what episode did we have him on? Like episode 5 or something? I think
so.
Yeah,
Episode
Saikoro.
5.
Yeah, go back and listen to Saikoro's interview with us if you haven't. That's episode 5, and that's the Damien that we're speaking of. Man, it blows my mind. Even back then, he was trading and selling games.
Oh yeah.
So, how much did he sell you that copy of Contra for?
If I remember correctly, it was I think it was $12.
That's a very specific number.
Yeah. I believe it was $12, and it was well worth it because that game was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that is an incredible game. I never had an opportunity growing up to really play it, so like my knowledge of Contra is just as an adult, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say you could fire up the NES Classic Edition, but it's not on there for some reason.
No, I thought it was. Huh.
No, I think they have Super C, which is not quite the original Contra.
That doesn't make any sense. Well, that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, right.
Because we can dive into emulation one of these days too, if you like.
Oh boy.
So after the NES, where'd you go from there?
We definitely had a Super Nintendo in the home, but I don't remember too much about my time with the Super Nintendo outside of Super Mario World, the Mortal Kombat games, and Doom. I think my main system after the NES was probably the Genesis.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like as long as I can remember, you were all about the Genesis in its various forms.
Oh yes.
Because you not only had the Genesis, but you had a number of the add-ons too, right?
Yeah, I had the thanks to Funcoland, I had the Sega CD and the 32X.
Nice.
Yeah, and I also I took the weird obscure gaming system tangent even further, and also in that time had an Atari Jaguar.
Ooh, now that's a console.
It is something.
That should be burned.
Let's go to the Jaguar first, because I think there's a lot to talk about there, and then we'll circle back to Sega.
Sounds good.
I'm ready for this one.
What was it about the Jaguar that piqued your interest?
Alien versus Predator. That game looked, back in the day, that game, at least from the still screenshots, looked awesome. And me being a huge fan of Alien and Predator, like, I wanted that game, but I didn't have the system. It was prohibitively expensive back then. But eventually, when that system failed super hard, the prices crashed with it, and my mom got me one day. And I finally got to see what all the fuss was about.
So, did it live up to the hype?
Yes and no. I mean, I still thoroughly enjoyed it. It's still like I finally got to quench my thirst for trying out that game that had seemed elusive for a very long time. But at the same time, like, there was no music in the game, so it was utterly silent other than sound effects. The frame rate was extremely choppy, and I mean, it was cool, but it had some shortcomings. So
it's definitely something that I kind of look back on, I think, with rose tinted glasses.
Yeah, I don't dare put it on now because I know my nostalgic memories would just be crushed.
Yeah.
What were some of the other games that you had on the Jaguar?
I had Doom on the Jaguar, which was actually not a bad version of Doom. Like, unlike the SNES version, the enemies could actually turn around and have backs, and they would fight each other.
Yep.
And I remember on Doom on the Jaguar, you could do local death matches and co-op, but you needed to have. Oh yeah, but you needed to have 2 Jaguars and 2 televisions. So I remember I only got to do it one time. I don't even remember who was over, but one of my friends was over, and they brought a TV. And we went down into my basement, and we hooked up that TV next to my TV, and we hooked up 2 Jaguars, and we did some deathmatch. And for a couple of fleeting hours, it was pretty cool.
That had to been like the coolest fucking thing ever back then. Like,
oh yeah,
LAN parties for consoles weren't really a thing. And here you were having essentially a LAN party.
A very limited version of it, but yeah, and it was just awesome because, I'd played the single-player version of Doom so long that actually playing with another real human being was totally cool.
Oh, I bet.
How did the Jaguars connect? Was there some sort of a link cable?
I do believe there had to be, but I don't remember much about it. But I guarantee you it was probably called something like the JagLink.
That's creative.
I'm pretty sure you are right, man. I'm looking at it right now. Can I make my own JagLink cable? Yeah, there's a bunch of people like trying to figure out how to like basically make these. Oh my god, I gotta send you this box because it's like the box art is just magnificent on this. Look at this.
Oh my god, it's so 80s.
I remember that.
Oh,
but dude,
man.
The Jaguar controller was absolutely something else. It was like totally not ergonomic in any way, shape, or form, and it had a full number pad in the center of it, like a calculator.
What?
And I remember the games came with overlays that you could actually slide into the controller over that number pad, and the numbers would do different things depending on what game you were playing.
Weird.
And I remember with Doom, the overlay would actually map different weapons to the number pad, so you can like just press a button if you wanted to pull up the BFG or like the chainsaw, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, there weren't any other systems outside of the PC that were doing that. If you played the PC version of Doom, you had that ability. You could just press 5 and it was a rocket launcher, or I think 3 was a shotgun. And this basically replicated that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking at it now.
I
I really don't recall this controller ever looking like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's best that you forget. Because despite the fun quirkiness of those overlays, it was not a great controller, unfortunately.
There's been so many systems over the years that have tried to use overlays too, and it always just people lose them, and it just stops working out. Like Intellivision was using it for a while. I know. I think the Vectrex had an overlay over the screen. And
oh, wow.
like if you're trying to like sell a game, if the overlays are included with it, that adds to the value.
I'm sure.
It's wild. It's so wild. So
I remember this system being displayed in like every KB Toys.
That sounds about right.
And no one was like waiting in line to play it.
That also sounds about right.
Yeah, it was just kind of sitting there on, and like the employee just always seemed disgruntled that like it was just there and like turned on.
Like, and then they eventually released a CD attachment for the Jaguar, which would let you play Jaguar CD games. And I'm not even kidding. If you look at this thing, it made the Atari Jaguar look like a toilet seat.
I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that. There is one game that I want you to talk about a little bit, Dave. Can you tell Will and the listeners about Club Drive?
Oh no. Not to be confused with Drive Club, which is actually a playable finished game from what I understand.
I'm already intrigued.
Club Drive, man. It was like you could choose from like a whole bunch of different cars, but if I remember correctly, they were just untextured polygons where you could choose a different color. And I think that there was the only time you ever heard music was this crappy MIDI during the title screen, and then when you were actually playing the game, you got the worst like audio representation of cars going vroom at different frequencies. And
I've got to hear this.
And dude, like the game, like there were no, if I remember correctly, there were no like finished textures in most of the game. It was just like planes that were shaded in different colors. And if you drove too close to a wall, you might get stuck in the wall or like sucked outside of the map.
Wow.
And
it's like the BF3 beta.
Yeah.
It was so awful that it was charming.
Weren't you like toy cars kind of like running around in like this huge like world too? Like I could have sworn
that
there was like
that was one level where you were little cars in someone's house.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that like driving underneath a pool table or something.
Yeah, but I don't think you could really tell it was a pool table or like any piece of furniture.
Yeah,
but yeah, that was a level.
Oh man, I have this strange fascination with the Jaguar, and I've always wanted to get one, despite knowing just how bad it is. Like it's on my list of systems to eventually, hopefully acquire.
Well, you could always get one and then just like use it as like a backup toilet seat.
Actually, you would not want to do that because the Jaguar CD attachment is incredibly expensive these days.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
How much does one go for?
I haven't looked in a while, but I know if you take even a quick look out there, you'll see that they're pretty pricey.
Oh boy, here we go.
Duh.
Pricey shits.
And while you're looking, I'll tell you, I accidentally blew up my Atari Jaguar because again, I was very young. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I'm guessing that I plugged in a power supply to it that was like just way too powerful. And the system turned on for a little while, and then I smelled this burning smell, and I actually saw smoke coming out of the system.
Oh my god!
And so I
Jesus.
Yeah, I quickly like unplugged it, and it was dead.
So, I'm having a hard time believing this, but eBay is saying a minimum of $450, and that's for non-working, for parts only console.
Wow.
I'm not surprised, man. And dude, there's only like 5 games on that system, if I remember correctly.
For real?
I think so. I remember the only one I remember is Myst.
Yeah. So here's an auction for $600, and it includes Myst, Blue Lightning, and VidGrid.
That's such a terrible name.
VidGrid.
Yeah.
I've never even heard of I've never heard of Blue Lightning either, but at least like that one kind of, self-explanatory. You see like a, jet engine or jet on the thing, but like VidGrid, like what the fuck is it?
Imagine if that was like a current game and you were trying to like pre-order it.
Yeah, I think it's some kind of a music game. I'm looking at the picture and it's like I see Soundgarden, Red Hot Chili Peppers. Oh man,
dude, it's like a playable TRL with like Carson Daly.
Is it?
I don't know.
Oh,
it's just the first fucking thought that came to my mind.
I remember with the Jaguar, there were a few fighting games on it, and I remember there was this one that was incredibly hard for me to find. It was called Ultra Vortec, and I remember looking everywhere for this game in the 90s. To no avail. And then one day I was in like a GameStop somewhere. I don't think it was a GameStop back then. It was probably Electronics Boutique. And they had a copy of it. And I like begged my mom to get it for me, and she got it for me. And I brought it home, and I was so excited to finally play this thing.
Oh no.
Oh my gosh.
Can we just talk about the fact that this system looks like a panini press? Like, you can make a sandwich in this thing. Can we just acknowledge this photo?
I wouldn't recommend, but you're totally right. It does kind of look like a panini press.
Forget Panera, man. Just get a Jaguar.
Yeah, just spend $850 and you can make your own paninis at home.
Yeah, and then use it as a toilet seat when you're done with it.
Oh
my God, we're just ripping on this thing.
Despite its shortcomings, I really did enjoy the system. But yeah, that Ultra Vortex was a dream-shattering experience. It was so awful. It was slow. It was choppy. Like, it was laggy. The audio was crap. The graphics were crap. The levels were crap. The fatalities, which look so cool when seen in still images in the magazines, were not when you actually see them in motion.
Really?
But I do remember there was a poopality where you could turn your opponent into poop.
Oh, gosh.
Wow.
God bless America.
So yeah, not a shining example of the Jaguar library.
Yeah, that's a major low.
All right, so let's pivot into back to the Sega side of things, because as ridiculous as the Jaguar is, I've known you as a bit of a Sega gamer for a very long time too, and between the Genesis, the Sega CD, and the 32X, I mean, there were some pretty awesome games on there, and some pretty terrible ones too.
Indeed.
So did you start out with just the Genesis and start building from there, or?
I started with the just the Genesis, and
And what games did you start with?
I was definitely a Sonic guy. I loved all the Sonic games. And there was this one, believe it or not, first-person shooter on the Genesis called Zero Tolerance.
I remember that game.
Oh yeah.
Holy shit! I remember when you bought it, and I came over and played it. I was like blown away.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back at it now,
Oh, man.
the actual window screen that you play in is so tiny, but it was really cool back in the day.
I gotta look this up. I haven't played this game in forever. Oh, that's right. It had like the your character card on the bottom, and it had the map
Yes.
and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this game was so fucking cool, Will. Like,
It really was.
You gotta keep in mind, like, we were playing games that were like designed for a PC on a controller,
Yeah, link it up.
and there's a couple screenshots. Well, there's one screenshot in there. It's not the best one, man. I gotta find some videos on this. This game was so fucking cool.
Zero tolerance for the Mega Drive.
Yeah,
And it actually had, it had pretty decent music and pretty decent sound effects. I remember, like, when you would pick up a weapon, this calm voice would be like, "Shotgun collected."
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
it was
cool.
a lot of fun.
GamePro gave the game a mostly positive review, commenting that first-person games like Zero Tolerance really put pressure on a system's processor, but Accolade has done a good job here. The anxiety caused by an adversary careening around a corner or the twitching body of a gunned-down spider is severe. Wow. 7.5 out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah, man.
That's good for like a first-person shooter on a console.
I love the box art.
Yeah, and I remember that game. You could actually do a little bit of environmental damage too, if I remember correctly.
Could
Nice.
Nothing major, but you could you could see damage on the walls if you accidentally hit a wall. It was and just hearing the soundtrack, like, I still remember the title screen music, and it definitely gives me all kinds of nostalgic feels.
Man, this is I was hoping we'd have moments like this. I am like grinning ear to ear looking at screenshots of this game. Like, the only time I ever got to play it was over your house because I didn't have the Genesis.
I remember we would bring it over, or I would bring it over to John and Eaker's house back in the late 90s. We had a day, I remember, where we played that and NFL Game Day 98 on the PlayStation.
I love that we're old enough to say back in the late 90s we were doing this.
And it's fun. It's funny because
scary too.
I was totally like deluded because I was there with like Eaker and John and friends, and we were having a great time. And I somehow mistakenly convinced myself that I might be into sports games with that NFL 98. And so I went out and bought it. And it was a huge waste of money. Not because it was bad. I mean, I couldn't objectively rate whether it was a good NFL game or not. It just it just did not hold my interest as someone who's not really into sports games.
You said this guy's name was Eager?
Eaker with a K.
Oh, okay.
So his father was born overseas in it was a Spanish country, Basque, I believe.
Oh, I don't know.
So Yeah, yeah, his brother got a normal name and he got an ethnic name. But they grew up in America. They were born and raised in America. So like, he was 100% American.
Yeah.
It's just
And actually, while we're on the topic of the Sega peripherals and John and Eaker, it was actually those two who got me into the Sega CD, because John and Eaker had purchased a Sega CD at Funkoland, and I'd never seen one before, and we went back to their house and they hooked it up, and before my eyes, I was blown away. For the first time in my life, I was seeing actual full motion video in a video game. And it utterly, as someone who'd never seen it before, I was like, I cannot believe that this is possible. And I was just so enthralled by this game. And that game was Sewer Shark.
Oh, the titles are just getting worse.
Well, I mean, that sums it up pretty much too. Like, it's not a very good game.
No.
Wasn't this, describe the gameplay for Will, a Sewer Shark, please.
All right, man. Basically, after the introduction videos, you are in a tunnel in some kind of a little buggy, speeding through the tunnels, shooting at glowing rats, while this repetitive soundtrack is going, and some voice is giving you vague directions as to where the rats are or where to turn or something. It was incredibly repetitive, and I remember when I actually bought my own Sega CD from Funkoland. I remember when I hooked it up that I had watched the FMV opening, but I had never actually played the game. So I had my dad come in, and I'm like, Dad, look at how good this looks. And we're watching the video, and then all of a sudden it goes into the gameplay, and we're just like in this endless tunnel shooting rats, and he's just like, that's it. And yes, it was.
Wow, what a backstory.
Was this the game that you tried to buy for a penny at
Oh, dude, yes. So I broke my Sewer Shark copy somehow, and I was devastated. But Funkoland had these basically newspapers. They were like newspapers you'd unfold, and it would tell you what the current game prices were.
I remember those.
And I saw that Sewer Shark was 9 cents. And I was like, shit, I got 9 cents. So I went down to Funkoland. And I was like, I went to the guy and I'm like, hey, I broke my copy of Sewer Shark. And he just looked at me aghast and he was like, and you want another one? Yeah, so.
That's awesome. What a good story.
Yeah. So I do have a nice working copy of it somewhere now.
Does it have the case and everything too? Or is it just the disc?
Oh no, it's just the disc. I remember it was a blue disc, and I don't remember what, but I know if you put it in a CD player, you could actually like hear some audio. Like I know a lot of those.
Yeah, a lot of those games back then, they would do that. You'd put a disc in, and it would have the soundtrack or like audio tracks or things like that.
Yeah, I want to say it might have been the company Digital Pictures that did a lot of those like full motion video games, and sometimes they would even put like hidden things on the CD that you'd only find if you like put the CD in.
Weird.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
I'm looking at their lineup now. Yeah, I remember that they had that red D and the blue P around a globe. Was their logo?
Indeed.
Corpse Killer.
Oh my gosh, Corpse Killer.
Yeah, I remember you had that too, didn't you?
I did. I had Corpse Killer, and let me tell you, the best way to play that game, at least for me, was not the Sega CD version, but the CD32X version, or 32X CD, which is where if you combined the Sega CD and the 32X, you could play certain Sega CD games with slightly better graphics. And that was definitely the best looking version of that game.
I think you were doing a great sales pitch there, and then all of a sudden you just kind of dropped it.
Yeah.
Well, I got to be honest. But yeah, that game was cool though, because like it had this full motion video like at the start where you're this dude, if I remember correctly, you're parachuting into a jungle and you get stuck in a tree, and then randomly a zombie like bites your leg, and so then some dude comes out of nowhere and he like machetes the zombie, and then all of a sudden you like both jump on a Hummer. And the game begins, and you're just like with a light gun shooting at a ridiculous wave of these like shabbily dressed actors who are portraying zombies rushing at the screen. And yeah, that was another repetitive one, but it was fun.
What about Night Trap? You had Night Trap too, didn't you?
That was another one I had on the 32X CD. And honestly, despite all the controversy about that game, it just never really held my interest enough to actually play through it.
What was the controversy?
You'd have to look it up, but I remember, I think they thought it was like the themes were a little too adult to be marketed towards like kids back in the day, or I think there were rumors that there might have been like some nudity in the game or something, but I don't think there ever actually was. I just remember it being like a not so great FMV game where you're looking at security cameras and trying to capture. They were never quite clear if they were like supposed to be vampires or like burglars, but you were like you're springing all these ridiculous traps to catch these dudes who are like breaking in. And I know recently, I think Limited Run Games actually like released a new like HD remastered version of Night Trap.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. I think it's yeah, they did a Kickstarter, and what it was on the Switch.
Really?
Yeah,
and they put it. They did one
others.
for the Vita too. They did for the Vita.
And if I remember,
they did any other system. So,
and if I remember correctly, I think with the box art, they even tried to emulate the like a little bit the packaging of the old school Sega CD version, where it had like I think the blue and like lighter blue stripes on the side.
That's cool.
Which is kind of a nice touch.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I gotta try and check that out. I never played this game. You know, I'm familiar with it, but this was part of a huge like Senate hearing. It was this game, Mortal Kombat, and a couple others, and this is why we have the ERSB, basically.
What humble
or
beginnings.
ESRB, excuse me, ESRB.
Yes,
my mistake.
I remember that being such a big deal, like when you were a kid in the 90s, like you just kind of paid attention to that because you knew that like it was kind of like a thing that your parents would potentially look at.
My mom never really cared. She's like, cause she, you know what, she was watching, like we would go to the video store and we'd rent movies, and like, I was watching like, you know, R-rated movies with my parents. If there was like something sexual, like I had to like close my eyes or go in the other room. But if it was violence, she's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
You know. So
you're going to be exposed at some point.
Exactly. And I think, you know, like her attitude with movies was the same as her attitude with games. Like as long as I understand the difference between reality and fiction, it's okay. Like to expose me to that kind of stuff because like it's, you know, she made it clear like this is not how real life works. Like it's not, you know, violence is violent. You know, it's not glory.
Sure.
So, but
very forward thinking mom there, Drew.
Yeah, she has her moments.
You know, you mentioned you mentioned Mortal Kombat there for a moment.
Yeah, I was gonna go down that rabbit hole with you.
And I want to ask you a question, Drew. If you remember, back in our high school career, how we would spend our lunches in the media center trying to put together the ultimate Mortal Kombat strategy guide.
That began when we were in like I think 7th or 8th grade, and then eventually, yeah, we ended up going trying to put that together. Yeah, the two of us would sit down and we would essentially just copy information from other strategy guides.
I remember we gave up our recess every day, and we would go and get our floppy disks, and we would work on the Mortal Kombat Anthology, which was our guide to every Mortal Kombat game that had been released up to that time.
It was a Microsoft Word document.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, and I don't believe we ever finished it.
We never did.
Find those floppies.
Yeah, they got to be somewhere.
I think if anybody's going to have copies, it would probably be you. I don't think I have copies of that anymore.
Check the attic, Dave.
Yeah right. Maybe there's something next to that Telegames box.
I don't have. I don't think I have a working floppy disk drive anymore, unfortunately.
No, I don't think anybody does.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we would go in and we would like color code it and like type it all out and stuff, and
That's cool.
Yeah.
Good memories.
It
You know,
was,
I remember-
it was a good memory.
I remember Damien and I were like so into Mortal Kombat that we both wanted desperately to make like our own fighting games one day.
Mhm.
And we, of course, didn't know anything about programming. So I remember like Damien basically got a notebook and he started like designing his own fighting game. And he would like, he drew the
I
characters.
remember that.
Yes. And he drew the characters.
I remember
And
that. Yeah.
he had their bios. He had like mock-ups of what the stages would look like. And he had the fighting system all mapped out. And it was really cool. And I kind of jumped on board and made my own as well, which wasn't quite as well drawn or put together as his. But that was like just another way as kids back in the day, we were like daydreaming about, you know, actually making the video games that we were playing. And unfortunately, it never really panned out with us actually making anything, but it was cool to fantasize about it for a while back then.
Yeah, Damien is such a meticulous dude, and I could totally see him doing that at like the age of 5.
I mean, you're not far off. I mean, you guys were what? How old when you were doing that?
Oh man, it's very. Let me think real quick. Mortal Kombat came out in I think '92, so I was like 9. So we were probably like 11, 12, somewhere in there.
Yeah. And he was like just a fantastic artist too. I mean, he still is.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
But I mean, at that age, to be drawing like of the caliber that he was drawing at was just, it blew my mind. I remember like you guys showing me all this stuff and just being like awestruck by it. Like I had no idea what was going on.
And it's funny though, Drew, because like I had no actual ability to like program a game back then. So like I decided to jump ahead and just make the film adaptation. So like I don't remember if you were in any of the scenes we filmed, but again, I got together with Jonathan and Eker and we like I had written a script based on this video game and like we filmed a bunch of the scenes from it, like the fighting scenes and crap. And it was just gold.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Oh man. That was there were some great movies that we made back in the day, Dave.
I'd have to say the best movies were the ones, Drew, that you and I made together. They were some classics, let me tell you.
Do you think that they are in existence somewhere still?
Oh, they are. I have them here in my closet, but I have no means of playing them.
We'll find one. We'll find ways. I mean, there's definitely ways of getting it transferred, at least to DVD.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some
stuff,
gems in there.
So let's talk a little bit about Mortal Kombat because that was a big game for both of us when we were growing up. Because I had like I personally was kind of like either Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, and I played Street Fighter with some friends. I played Mortal Kombat with others. And and you were a Mortal Kombat guy.
I was definitely a hardcore Mortal Kombat guy for 2 reasons. And actually maybe 3 reasons. And it was the art style of Street Fighter did not connect with me at that point in my life. And it's funny because later on I became a gigantic anime fan. So eventually, I think had that game hit later in my life, I would have been all over it. But I know back when I first played it, I definitely preferred the more realistic look of Mortal Kombat. And the second reason was that I liked having a block button instead of having to hold back, which I know a lot of people feel differently on that. And finally, of course, it was the fatalities. Like, in my humble opinion, a match was not over unless I could rip my opponent's spine out.
You violent man, you.
Only in video games.
Do you remember the fighting game tournaments that we would have?
I absolutely do. And I remember we would build, and again, I know Damien I think took point on this, but out of paper, he would like draw and cut out and then assemble like full 3D models of arcade cabinets.
Yeah.
And I remember we had this tournament and we were playing like several different fighting games. And I remember everyone paid like a cover charge to get into the tournament. And we had this arcade trophy that we had made. And I just remember we stuffed the money in the top of it. So like whoever won got this like paper arcade, like overflowing with dollar bills.
Love it.
You know, I don't remember for sure, but I'm going to guess Damien probably took that one home. He probably had the victory.
Man, like, you really are. I mean, Drew, I'm sure you're more familiar with what Dave is saying here, but you're shedding a lot of light on the creativity juices that were kind of flowing with really all three of you. And I was really very unaware, but I'm glad to hear that you guys were doing like some pretty outrageous things back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really were. It was a great time. A great time before the crushing realities of getting a job in the real world destroyed those dreams.
Paper mache arcade cabinets.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot about those trophies, man. I completely forgot about those trophies.
They were works of art.
I remember though, we did one tournament where Mortal Kombat 3 had come out, and you were just crushing it with Stryker.
Yeah, man, no one crushes it with Stryker, but somehow I did. And like Stryker is like a walking joke of a character, and yet somehow I tapped into something, and I like unleashed this fury, and I was actually able to like beat people left and right as Stryker.
Yeah.
So he was like the Dan of Street Fighter, essentially, then, right?
I mean, he had like more than one move. Like it wasn't that he was like completely inept. It's just that like the balance was so far in the other direction for other characters that if you put him up against somebody playing as like Cabal or Sindel, which were like tier 1 characters, Stryker really didn't stand a chance. And somehow Dave just found a way to make it work.
And I think a big thing with Stryker was that he was visually totally unappealing compared to the other characters. He like, you have like Cabal, who has this awesome like Tusken Raider mask, and then you of course have Sector and Cyrax, the robots, and meanwhile you have Stryker, who just looks like a semi out of shape, maybe middle-aged dude dressed as a fake cop. So
I used to work with a guy that kind of looked like this. He had the same face.
Like, but if you look at his versus screen portrait, he looks very constipated.
I'm gonna have to look him up now.
I just put it in the chat.
Oh, okay, beautiful.
And look at the shirt. Like his palette swap was red instead of blue. It's just like the same shitty shirt.
What's up with that backwards cap he's wearing?
It's so bad. Like, I feel like the shirt is like one of those old school like And One shirts from like Bob's.
And Drew, I'll tell you, Drew, like, it might have been EGM or one of the video game magazines back in the day. They were having a contest where you could win an actual Mortal Kombat 3 arcade cabinet, like a full-size real deal cabinet. And all you had to do was go to an arcade and take a picture of yourself next to the cabinet and send it in. But the caveat was you had to be dressed as your favorite character from Mortal Kombat.
Oh my God.
So I remember Duchess, the Duchess fast food restaurant in our area where we grew up. They had a Mortal Kombat 3 cabinet back then. So I went there dressed as Stryker and had my mom take a picture while I was mocked by everyone at Duchess. And to add insult to injury, I did not win.
I'm so sorry.
No.
I'm so sorry.
Jesus. I'm at a loss for words. I mean, did you end up going to Bob's or what?
Going to Bob's?
Yeah, the clothing store in Milford.
I don't even remember. I know it was the worst costume ever. But honestly, if you look
it had to have been.
If you look at the actual costume from the game right there in the chat, I mean, it already was the worst costume ever, so I wasn't too far off.
He's got the Andrew Dice Clay gloves on.
Oh, yeah. All you need is a backwards baseball cap, a fanny pack, and a bad attitude.
Oh, God. He's got that, like, Judge Dredd look on his face just without the fucking helmet.
Like, I remember for his fatality, he would like run over to the character and really quickly like attach all these bombs to them, and they just kind of stood there and let him do it. And then he would run to the other end of the stage, squat down and plug his ears until they exploded.
The fatalities in Mortal Kombat 3 were a bit of a stretch at times.
Well, like, what's
yes.
even around his neck, though? Like, is that just like...
That's a shock collar.
Black electrical tape.
Yeah. That's probably what Dave had to use to, like, emulate it.
Oh, it was.
Mom, get the electrical tape. Quickly, I got to be there in 5 minutes.
Oh,
God.
fucking Striker.
So, Dave, I want to talk about another game that you were an avid player of back then, and that is Doom.
Oh my gosh, Drew.
You and I spent hours and hours and hours playing Doom on every possible system we could, and we would do death matches once the PCs were available. And man, tell me about that game. What that meant to you.
One of my all-time favorite franchises to this day, and I'll tell you though, despite how awesome like the 2016 version of Doom was, I still always find myself going back to those original like 2.5D versions from the early 90s. I remember my very first experience with Doom. I think you were the one who convinced me to try it. Was on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, that was my first experience with the game.
And you know, despite looking back, like how rough of a port it was and how floaty it controlled, like back then, having never played a first-person shooter before, that game was terrifying. And even on the SNES, and I got to tell you, man, the SNES had an awesome version of the soundtrack.
It did. I think the SNES version had the best music out of all the consoles.
Oh yeah, and it also, to me at the time, it was like the most complete, because even though the enemies couldn't turn around and the floors weren't textured, it was the only version I remember back then that had the Cyber Demon, that had the Spider Mastermind, and those were just some of the coolest enemies ever. And so that was the only way for me without a PC to experience that back then.
That Cyber Demon was just like, first time I played against him, it was just terrifying.
Oh man, and that music
that was
in
the first
his,
time
Citadel.
Oh man, like that was the first time a game ever like legitimately scared me.
Well, Doom is just scary. Like almost every Doom that ever has come out like has like a scary quality, and back then I think like some of those original versions were just, you felt so kind of constricted and secluded, and it was kind of this claustrophobic feeling that you would get like when you would approach an enemy.
Yeah,
but
I tend
to agree.
But it had, you know, still such especially on like the original PC version, it had such a super fast pace, and just no need to reload your weapons. So you had this like almost overpowered feeling at times, which they definitely took to all new levels with the 2016 version. But you know, one of the best things about Doom in the era that we were playing it was the ability to make your own levels. And I remember I bought this guidebook, which was called like The Alchemy of Doom, Secrets of the Doom Programming Gurus. And it was the size of like a phone book. It was like 1,000 pages long. And it was a guide. It was a guide for how to make your own Doom levels. And I remember like I was daunted because it was so complex and the book was so vast, but I was like committed to figuring it out. But I'll tell you though, Drew, as you may remember, before we were actually making levels from scratch, there was this program that would let you add like enemies and items to the levels.
Yeah, it was to like the existing.
Yeah,
you added to the existing stages, so you could like program in, 1,000 enemies in like E1M1 or whatever. Okay.
So I remember we were in the same schools together growing up, and I remember we were on a field trip, and at this particular field trip, I don't know if we were seeing a play or something, but I like had to use the restroom, so I'm like in the bathroom, and then all of a sudden I hear someone sit in the stall beside me, and I hear a familiar voice go, "Dave, is that you?" And I'm like,
"Oh yes, it's a toilet story."
And he's like, "Dave, is that you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." and Drew goes, "I just put 50 cyber demons in the Tower of Babel." And I'm like, okay, Abe, that is actually fucking awesome, but B, I'm doing something right now. So
God.
I remember we continued that conversation later.
Oh, I hope so.
But it was pretty cool, man, to be able to do
He
that.
just couldn't wait. He couldn't wait.
No, man, he was excited, and I don't blame him, man.
If I can barely
man.
breathe. If my memory serves me, like, I believe I was so excited that I was able to do that. Like, I think I lost sleep that night.
I wouldn't be
woke up
surprised,
and
man.
Oh man, like I don't know what, why I didn't just call you on the phone.
I don't know, man, but you know what? I'm glad you didn't, because there's no better way you could have told me about that than the way you did in the toilet beside my own on a field
What kind of
trip in like
sneakers
8th grade.
was Dave wearing?
I don't know, but they were very identifiable, apparently.
Drew, can you imagine if it wasn't me in there? If it was like
Oh,
another
God.
person?
Just told him anyway.
Oh, shit. Yeah. Well, I mean, at that point, you're committed. You might as well just fucking go all in, right?
Oh, God.
Like, especially if they had no idea what a cyber demon was.
Oh, God.
I can only imagine how they would interpret that.
Oh, man.
Oh.
I can only imagine. That's... I'm so sorry.
No,
I'm
man, it
so
was a good
sorry.
time. It was a good time, man.
gosh.
We were way into that game, man. Like Doom and Mortal Kombat were my go-tos back in the 90s. I was more excited about those games than anything else.
Yeah, I think for me too. Like Mortal Kombat was my fighting game of choice until well, I was starting to get into Street Fighter more right around the time that 3 came out.
Okay.
And that's when I started pivoting into the Street Fighter, because like Mortal Kombat 3 and Ultimate I didn't think played as good as Street Fighter. And then when we got the PlayStation, Street Fighter Alpha was a game like I fell in love with that game. And Mortal Kombat Trilogy was just a huge letdown.
You know,
So-
for me it's the opposite, because I thought that Mortal Kombat Trilogy was like everything in the kitchen sink just sloppily thrown onto a CD, and well,
like, it's like, you're making a pizza, but you're so hungry that you don't know what to put on it. So it's like, all right, let's throw on some pepperoni. Let's throw on some asparagus. How about some peanut butter?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yo.
That's kind of what like Trilogy ended up being to me.
So I remember on the PlayStation version of Trilogy, there was this option where for some of the characters like Raiden or Kano, you could actually play as them in their earlier version of their costume from like a previous Mortal Kombat game.
Yeah,
That's
I
cool.
forgot about that. Yeah,
And
they had the old moveset too.
they did. And I remember Damien and I were playing that game, and we knew that was a feature, but neither of us like knew how to do it. Like, because I guess we didn't look at the instruction manual or whatever, like, because no one does. But I remember I figured it out. And if I remember correctly, the key was you had to press select on the character, and it would like, there'd be like a burst of fire, and they would suddenly like become their older version of the character. And I remember when I first did it by accident, Damien was like, "Oh man, how did you do that?" And like, I didn't want to just say press select, so I quickly like made all these fake gestures on the controller like I was doing some complex thing, which I ended with select, and it happened again.
Oh man.
Oh my gosh, I could totally just see you doing that. But you're not like really hitting any buttons.
No, I just faked it. It was select, just select.
Yeah.
He's gonna listen to this and he's gonna be like, "What the hell, man?"
After all these years.
I'm pretty sure he figured it out quickly.
Oh yeah.
So Dave, I'm gonna jump a little bit forward in time because our time is a little bit limited today. But I want to talk to you about our RPGs,
Okay.
because that is something that you kind of dove into full bore once you discovered them.
Oh man, Drew, let me tell you, my first RPG experience was actually at a sleepover at our friend Ian's house back in the 90s.
Yep.
And you might have been there. And I remember,
I believe I was, because I think I had the same experience you did.
and I remember they were playing this game that I'd never heard of at the time called Final Fantasy VII, and I didn't actually pick it up and play it, but in that room with everyone else, I watched others play it, and I like just slowly like fell under the spell of the story that they were weaving in that game, which I had never played a game at that point that had such an involved narrative. You know, a fully fleshed out narrative with like characters and backstories and twists and everything. And I remember, again, fearing it might be kind of like the NFL Game Day '98, where like I was there with friends and I was like seduced by this idea that it was better than it actually was. I like cautiously asked my mom to buy it for me, and she did. And I popped it in at home one night, late at night. I remember vividly, it was August 2nd, 1998. And
wow.
Yeah, man, that's how significant an impact that game had on me. And I remember I was trying to, the first time I popped it in, I was showing my sister, and her first words about it were, "This game sucks," because because of the turn-based combat wasn't really what she was used to. But then when she saw that you could input your own name and like talk to characters and make choices, and that there was this huge world to explore, she like fell under the same spell I did. And we both totally got so obsessed with that game that we just poured dozens and dozens and dozens of hours into it. And
I remember Kim was maybe more obsessed with Final Fantasy VII than you were.
She was, absolutely, she was. And I remember
she dove in head first on that and like didn't come up for air.
Yeah, and I remember like there's some shocking moments in that game if you don't know about it, but like unfortunately we were so like into this game at the time that we looked up everything we possibly could about it. So we found out about the death of one significant character that was coming, and we like knew we were getting, because we kind of played the game together in a way, and we knew we were getting closer and closer to that moment, and we were just dreading it when that character would have to leave the story. And it happened, and as much as it sucked to see that character go, it made the game's villain just so much more awesome and so much more hateable. And again, we had that moment again near the end of the game when we realized that the game was going to be over and that we'd taken this huge journey, and it was finally going to be done. And that was like a huge emotional experience for us because we'd never played a game that was that deep. And
so how long would you say, not to interrupt Dave, but how long would you say it took you guys to complete this game?
It took 77 hours.
That's a pretty exact number as well.
I remember it vividly. It took her, that was how long it took, that was what was on the clock when I finished it, but I know she went back and like mastered everything there was to master in that game. So for her, she put more time into it than I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I went back after I beat it too, and I ended up mastering. I did 3 master magics, 3 master summons, and 3 master commands, and I know the time stopped counting at 99.99.99.
Wow!
And if I had to take a guess, I would say I probably put in another 15 to 20 hours after that.
Wow!
And I'll tell you, man, it wasn't just the gameplay and the story. I had never experienced a game that had music like the Final Fantasy games had, where it was like the soundtrack was absolutely like massive. Like, and my sister and I, we like bought the soundtracks to like every Final Fantasy game that we could find, and those soundtracks were like 4 discs long, like just filled with music.
Yeah.
And you being a piano and keyboard player too, like I remember you coming to me and saying, "Hey man, I'm learning how to play One Winged Angel." And,
yes.
And you bought, like, I remember you buying the sheet music for some of these albums and some of these games, and just every time, because we were in a band together too, Will, Dave would frequently just break out into a Final Fantasy song like when we were warming up.
That's awesome.
And I remember, like, because I took piano lessons for many years, and every year we would have a recital. And I remember, when I started, falling under the spell of the Final Fantasy games, I remember I asked my piano instructor if at the recital, instead of one of the songs they provided, if I could play something from Final Fantasy. And they kind of were they were a little hesitant about it, but they eventually let me do it. And then like every year after that, I would play a Final Fantasy song at the recital, and it turned out after I started doing it, other people started playing video game songs at the recitals.
That's
and
awesome.
yeah, it was really cool. But yeah, man,
You're
I
like paving the way.
trying to, man. And I remember, you know, Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8, 9, 10. The soundtracks were like so incredible, and I had been a pianist for a long time. That my dream at that time became to one day write video game music, and I would literally spend hours when I got home from school, like on my keyboard, like writing, writing music for video games that would never happen, and sequencing them and storing them on floppy disks. And I had, again, we're talking about floppy disks again, but I literally had probably like 70 floppy disks full of like video game music that I had composed.
Jesus.
And unfortunately, I never turned that into an actual career. But it still had a major influence on my appreciation for music, and even like the kind of music that I wrote as a part of the band I was in with Drew was heavily influenced by that style. And it's still there even nowadays with the music that I listen to, and when I do ever find the time to hook up the keyboard, I'm still very influenced by it.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
You can definitely hear like everything that you were writing just like dripping with Umetsu. Was it? Like
yes.
just that iconic sound of his.
Very iconic.
I'll tell you, man, like, and again, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but maybe Nobuo Uematsu.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, last year I was at me and my sister, my mom, for Christmas got us tickets to see Distant Worlds, which is this concert where an orchestra, performs various music from the Final Fantasy games. And this was at Carnegie Hall. And
Ooh.
I remember, and again, this was just last January. They actually introduced Nobuo Uematsu, who was there, and he came up. I think he said a couple words, and then he came to sit down in the audience, and I shit you not, he sat right next to me.
Holy
What?
shit!
Yeah, and like me and my sister were like whispering the whole show, like, man, I gotta talk to him. I gotta like, just tell him how much he influenced me. But then, like, as soon as the show ended, I shit you not, he literally ran away, like fled.
No. He must have known that you wanted like a couple selfies.
I don't know, man, but it was still awesome to be in his presence and to hear all that music that he wrote.
That's incredible, man.
Yeah.
I feel like it was fate, kind of,
Yeah, you never know, man.
In a way.
As cheesy as that sounds, it might have there might have been a reason for that.
You never know,
Yeah,
man.
well, I mean, to have an opportunity to, listen in person to somebody's, works who have inspired you in so many ways, and then have the guy just like literally sit down next to you, like that's so fucking cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to get back into writing some music.
You should, man.
Yeah.
Absolutely should.
I'd love to check it out.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So let's see here. I'm trying to think of what I mean. There's so many things that we didn't talk about, and I feel like we missed a whole like section of time because we have N64, PlayStation, and then of course like the more current generation of games too. So, I definitely want to take some time to bring you back in so we can kind of talk about those a little bit more one of these days, Dave.
Anytime, man.
We have a bit of a game that we like to play with our guests whenever they're on, and it's called the Lightning Round. Are you familiar with it?
I believe I heard this on the Damien episode where you ask questions rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Well, all right then.
So, so Will and I have put together a list of items, and we've kind of jumbled them up. And I mean, we've put them together so that there's some flow to them. But some of them are mine, some of them are his, and they're all mixed up. And I'm not sure who's going to be able to ask you which. So,
they're jostled.
They're kind of jostled around. So, we're going to ask you a question, and some of them will be either ors, some of them will be, what's your favorite blank kind of thing.
Okay.
Your goal is to answer as quickly as possible. Try not to explain your answer. But just kind of make it succinct, and we move on to the next thing.
All right, we can give it a try.
If you need it, yeah, I mean, if you need like a second to like pause to think about it, that's fine. Or if it's a case where it's like either or, and in your head, like you're really like, well, neither of these things, but it would rather be this, then you could even say the third thing, even if it's not an option.
Okay.
If that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, sounds fun.
So, since I don't have an audio cue for lightning round, let's lightning round.
Zap.
Will, you want to kick us off, man?
Let's do it. All right, Dave. Sega or Nintendo?
I'm gonna have to go with Nintendo, believe it or not.
Sony or Nintendo?
Sony.
Sony or Microsoft?
Sony.
Atari Jaguar or Sega 32X?
Jaguar.
Sonic or Mario?
Just because of Mario 64, I gotta go with Mario.
Wow. Resident Evil or Silent Hill?
Resident Evil.
Doom or Doom 2?
Doom 2. One of the best gaming sequels ever made.
Grandia 2 or Skies of Arcadia?
You son of a bitch. How can one choose? Oh, Skies of Arcadia.
Time Crisis or House of the Dead?
House of the Dead.
Good choice.
Cloud or Squall?
Lightning.
Wow.
Ken or Ryu?
Ryu.
Let's see here. This is a three-way. Reptile, Scorpion, or Sub-Zero?
Sub-Zero.
Striker or Nightwolf?
Oh, Striker.
Snake or Sam Fisher?
Snake.
MIDI or orchestral game music?
I'm going to have to go orchestral.
Nice.
Headset or speakers?
Speakers.
Pre-ordering versus non-pre-ordering?
Pre-ordering.
Best gaming convention?
Are you talking about like a convention where you go?
Yes.
Oh. It's not really a gaming convention, but I'd have to say Otakon.
That's fair enough.
Favorite system?
Ooh. PlayStation 3.
Good choice. Worst system?
Atari Jaguar. No, the Nokia N-Gage.
Oh,
Great choice.
Side talking. Favorite controller?
PlayStation 3.
Worst controller?
Atari Jaguar.
Favorite Final Fantasy?
Final Fantasy X.
Favorite Zelda?
Ocarina of Time.
Favorite fighting game?
Mortal Kombat 2.
Favorite game genre?
Currently, survival horror.
And finally, favorite game?
Final Fantasy VII.
Wow, man. A lot of very interesting choices here. I really didn't expect you to throw Atari Jaguar under the bus so many times.
You know,
well, after all, it is a
it.
toilet seat.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I love the Atari Jaguar, but I respect its faults and can't deny them.
Well, you can make a sandwich out of it.
Maybe you can do that, Will, but if I had that Jaguar CD, I would not be putting cheese in there. Aside from VidGrid.
Yeah. Fuck you, Carson Daly.
Oh, man. Dave, I know like both of us had so many more questions for you. I feel bad that we didn't even like get into like cosplay stuff. Will and I talked about asking you that, and I feel like that's something that we could really dive into.
That's
Maybe
okay,
we should
man.
save that for another episode, or
Yeah, we need a part 2.
Yeah, I mean, this was tremendous fun, guys, and I would be very happy to come back anytime.
We'd love to have you back.
Yeah, man. Thank you for taking the time to sit down and chat with us. It was a lot of fun. Especially for me, it was a real trip down memory lane. Rediscovering all these old stories that I had forgotten, and hearing about games that we used to play that I haven't even seen in 2.5 decades.
Yeah, man.
In some cases,
we got a deep gaming history.
Yeah, we do. So, again, how can the listeners find you on social media?
Epic_outro.
All right. And Will, if somebody would like to follow you, how can they find you?
Will_gear.
You can follow me personally at ScionStorm. And of course, the podcast itself at WDGRPodcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're available anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, all that stuff. Or just search for us in your favorite podcast app. You'll find us there. Please take a moment to subscribe. And if you like what we're doing, leave a review. Any and all feedback does help. And of course, we also have a Discord channel too. I forgot to show that out in the beginning of the show. But check out our Discord channel. The link for that will be in the show notes as well too. It's a great place for us to all get together and talk about video games. And it's a great community. And I think anybody that's a Discord fan will enjoy chiming in and talking with us.
Indeed.
So, Dave, once more, man, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit with us and chat games. And I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I got to congratulate you guys on putting this podcast together because I find it really inspiring that you guys are doing this every week and making something that you're passionate about a reality. So I'm a big fan.
Thank you. We're enjoying it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And it's, gaming podcasts are a bit of a passion, it's nice to be contributing something back to a genre that I've gotten so much enjoyment out of.
Indeed.
Awesome.
So on that note, everybody, thank you so much for listening to us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Take care.
Later.